This is a video essay. I'm Roman Mars.
This is a special place. The people who live here will tell you that. And so will a lot of people who'd like to live here. Take a look.
I rewatched Zodiac a few months ago. It was the first time I'd seen the film on a cinema screen, and I was struck again by just how overwhelming it is. There's so much narrative information, so many small asides, red herrings. You feel burdened somehow with the weight of Robert Graysmith's obsession. But I left the theatre with one specific shot in my mind. It's not a particularly memorable one, so if I just described it, those of you who've seen the film probably wouldn't know what I'm talking about. This is it here, an establishing shot of a plane parked on the tarmac at, presumably, San Francisco Airport. It's a garish, digitally stitched together frame. The falsity of the image is striking, and it jolts you from the headspace of the scenes before, dialogue-heavy sequences in a living room and in an office space. The clear presence of digital effects here made me sit up and take note of CGI throughout the rest of the film. It's not an overwhelming amount. Zodiac is mostly scenes of exposition, men in rooms talking about evidence of murder. There's a strict commitment to realism, harking back to investigative films vaguely within the era in which this film is set, most notably All the President's Men. There's a paradox at work in Zodiac, using digital technology to pay tribute to an analogue era of filmmaking. Now, I'm not the first person to point out this paradox, nor am I close to the most eloquent. Sam Dixon wrote a piece last year in Senses of Cinema about Zodiac and, in part, argued that the presence of digital effects and digital camera technology reflected anxiety about the death of celluloid.
Special digital effects here aren't produced for spectacle but for a detailed historic representation. Zodiac is a film whose digital images go to painstaking lengths to conceal their own immateriality.
This anxiety he sees reflected in the film's narrative as well.
The fixation on a missing indexical image that informs the cinematography of Zodiac also motivates the film's narrative, where the Zodiac killer himself is an absent core. His presence in the film for other characters is entirely an assembly of media traces.
That's the only place that word and that symbol ever appeared together before in letters.
Let's do our own assembly here, not of media traces but digital effects sequences. Here are the CGI landscapes of Zodiac. Two plane shots aside, it's all swooping virtual camera work. It reminds me of this great YouTube series by a guy named Andy Kelly called Other Places. In Other Places, Kelly presents these gorgeous portraits of video game environments, focusing mostly on stillness and close detail. But it's his wide angles of cityscapes that I'm thinking of. One of his videos on Grand Theft Auto 5 has a nighttime shot of Los Santos that's not too far removed from one of the nighttime cityscapes of Zodiac. Of course, that's because these videos emulate cinematic approaches to environment and space, but today the relationship between virtual cityscapes in film and video games is more of a two-way street.
What you have to do when you create a shot like that is mimic all the things you would expect to see on a busy San Francisco street at night. It really got to be to the point of, let's just make this as a complete CG shot, a complete environment.
Checkpoint. Checkpoint.
Let's look back at Zodiac. The digital images that strive for cinematic realism are also undermined by the impossibility of reenactment, the historically accurate Port Authority, the single-day cycle of the Trans-America Pyramid sequence, and of camera movement. Academic Mike Jones.
In computer games, the virtual camera is native and innate, and for the virtual camera to find its way into traditional cinema, it is to gaming that we must look for the future of cinematic form.
This virtual camera isn't only significant for how it moves, but also because of the space it moves around in.
The camera, more viably referred to as a simple position of perspective, is then immersed into the scene after the major act of composition has already taken place. A staging of the camera rather than a staging for the camera.
I'm about to ask something very stupid, so brace yourselves. How do we know that Zodiac is set in San Francisco? 80% of the film is generic interiors, a newspaper office, a police precinct, bars, diners. Outside of the subtitles which tell us exactly when and where scenes are playing out, the clear visual traces of San Francisco and its iconography come through these digitally composed shots. We see skylines, streets, landmarks, the city condensed into digital synecdoches. Video game depictions of San Francisco are much the same.
I think one of the challenges, first of all, the Bay Area is gigantic, so it's really big. You cannot put it all into the game, so you have to pick the best spots. So I think what the team did really well is they identified those landmarks, like Suture Towers and everything, and then they started to craft the city, making sure that we align those things properly. Because if you start cutting entire district or shrinking down to 2 streets, something that's gigantic, you don't want to make the feeling wrong.
Watch Dogs 2 actually does cut out a district, the Richmond district, but that's beside the point. The main takeaway here is the anchoring of cities in their landmarks. American academic Bobby Schweitzer, in his PhD thesis on video game cities, wrote that
landmarks are a powerful way games can refer to the uniqueness of cities that contributes to their sense of place. Many video game cities based on existing physical cities make use of well-known places to imbue their game with meaning.
For San Francisco, that means the Golden Gate Bridge at a bare minimum, but there are other identifiable locales too. Fisherman's Wharf, the Transamerica Pyramid, even Alcatraz. Bobby Schweitzer again.
A city without monuments isn't really a city at all because it lacks history and a shared, even if fabricated, narrative.
I think Zodiac's embrace of CGI environments isn't only a cause for discussion about the death of celluloid and the limits of historical realism, but also a prompt to think about the relationship between the aesthetics of video games and contemporary cinema. Mike Jones again.
There is a shared method of primary composition between gaming, animation and cinematic form through a shared technological process. Unavoidably, this must lead to a shared aesthetic based as much on viewer expectations as on a shared production line process of making it.
I'd like to think too that there's some kind of counter-history of real locations in virtual spaces, wrought from video games and cinema alike. I definitely don't have the knowledge to present anything like a historiosity of video game cities, but I'm going to leave you with a question from someone who does.
But absolutely no hotel here, anywhere. Any hotels? Golden Gate Bridge. Sweet.